In the heart of Memphis, TN, a city known for its deep musical roots and cultural legacy, where the echoes of blues and soul still drift through Beale Street and along the banks of the Mississippi River, a different story unfolds every night beneath highway overpasses, in abandoned buildings, inside cars parked in dimly lit lots, and in crowded shelters where hope competes with exhaustion. This is a story about rising home values in the United States and the widening gap between stability and survival, about how median home prices in cities like Memphis have climbed steadily over the past decade, transforming neighborhoods once considered affordable into battlegrounds for investors, landlords, families, and individuals who simply want a place to sleep without fear. And as property values rise, so do rents, property taxes, and the cost of living, creating pressure that pushes the most vulnerable closer to the edge until one missed paycheck, one medical bill, one unexpected crisis becomes the tipping point that sends them into homelessness. And tonight we follow several lives woven together by circumstance, beginning with James, a 52-year-old warehouse worker who spent 20 years renting a small home in North Memphis, paying modest rent until the property was sold to an out-of-state investor who renovated the house, raised the rent by 40%, and forced James to choose between food, medication, and shelter, a choice no one should have to make. And when he fell behind by 2 months, he was evicted, his belongings placed on the curb as neighbors watched silently, unsure how to help in a market where they too feared displacement. Across town, Tanya, a single mother of 2, works full-time at a nursing facility, earning just above minimum wage. Yet even working 40 hours a week, she cannot afford the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, because as home values increase, landlords adjust rents to match market demand, and affordable units disappear, replaced by renovated properties advertised online to higher-income tenants, leaving Tanya on a waiting list for subsidized housing that stretches months, sometimes years, during which she and her children move between relatives, couches, and short-term motel stays, each move disrupting school routines and emotional stability, each day marked by the quiet anxiety of not knowing where they will sleep next month. The story widens to include Marcus, a veteran who returned from service carrying invisible wounds, struggling with PTSD and unable to maintain consistent employment, finding temporary refuge in a shelter downtown where beds fill quickly each evening, the line forming before sunset, a silent procession of men and women carrying backpacks that hold everything they own. And within the shelter walls there are rules, curfews, shared spaces, and limited privacy. Yet outside there is exposure to heat in summer, freezing rain in winter, and the constant vulnerability of street life. And Marcus often reflects on how the cost of housing nationwide has outpaced wages for years, how starter homes that once offered entry into stability now require incomes far beyond what many workers earn, how investors purchase single-family homes in bulk, converting them into rental portfolios, tightening supply and raising prices, turning homes into assets first and shelter second. Meanwhile, city officials debate solutions in council chambers, discussing zoning reform, affordable housing incentives, tax abatements, and public-private partnerships, acknowledging that while Memphis remains more affordable than coastal cities, the trajectory mirrors national trends where housing has become increasingly unattainable for low- and middle-income residents. And advocates argue for expanded rental assistance, mental health services, job training programs, and eviction prevention policies, emphasizing that homelessness is rarely the result of a single failure, but rather a cascade of systemic pressures, stagnant wages, healthcare costs, lack of affordable units, limited social safety nets, all converging at once. On a cold January night, outreach volunteers walk the streets offering blankets, hygiene kits, and information about available beds, speaking softly to those who prefer encampments over shelters due to past trauma or overcrowding, documenting names and needs, trying to build trust in a system that often feels impersonal. And among the tents near the river sits Angela, who once owned a small home inherited from her parents, but lost it after property taxes increased alongside neighborhood appreciation. A cruel irony where rising home values signal prosperity for some while spelling displacement for others. And she explains how quickly stability can unravel, how pride delays asking for help, how shame isolates people even in a city full of music and history and resilience. As weeks pass, we witness small victories and setbacks. James finding part-time work but struggling to save for a security deposit that now equals 2 months' rent. Tanya securing a housing voucher but unable to locate a landlord willing to accept it in a tight market. Marcus attending counseling sessions offered through a nonprofit yet facing long waiting lists for permanent supportive housing. And throughout their journeys, the backdrop remains the same. A housing market shaped by supply and demand, by investment trends, by policy decisions made far from the sidewalks where their consequences land. And the script refuses to reduce homelessness to statistics even as numbers rise year after year across the country, instead focusing on the human cadence of daily survival. The early morning search for public restrooms, the careful budgeting of a few dollars for food, the protective instinct of parents shielding children from stigma, the quiet dignity of individuals who maintain routines despite instability. We hear from landlords who argue that rising maintenance costs and property taxes necessitate higher rents, from economists who explain how limited housing construction after the last recession constrained supply, from community organizers who insist that housing is a human right rather than a commodity. And their voices overlap like instruments in a Memphis blues song, discordant yet connected, telling a story of a city at a crossroads where growth brings opportunity, but also exclusion. And as redevelopment projects transform certain neighborhoods with new apartments, coffee shops, and revitalized streetscapes, longtime residents worry about being priced out, about cultural erasure, about losing not only homes but histories. The narrative circles back to a fundamental question. What does it mean for home values to rise if the value of human stability falls? If economic indicators improve while more people sleep unsheltered, and the camera lingers on sunrise over the Mississippi River, light reflecting off downtown buildings while, just blocks away, individuals fold blankets and pack belongings before businesses open, careful to remain unseen. And in that contrast lies the tension of modern urban America, where prosperity and poverty exist side by side, separated sometimes by only a few streets yet divided by opportunity. And the script concludes not with easy answers, but with an invitation to witness, to understand that homelessness in Memphis, TN, and across the United States is intertwined with housing markets, wage structures, healthcare systems, and collective priorities, and that behind every data point about median home prices or rental increases is a person navigating uncertainty, carrying memories of stability and hopes for return, reminding us that a home is more than an investment. It is safety, identity, and the foundation upon which every other dream is built. As the sun climbs higher over Memphis, the city hums back to life, commuters crossing bridges, delivery trucks weaving through downtown streets, real estate signs planted in freshly landscaped yards advertising renovated homes at prices unimaginable just a decade ago. And the stories of James, Tanya, Marcus, and Angela continue to unfold against this restless backdrop of growth and strain. Because homelessness is not a single chapter, but an ongoing narrative shaped by every policy decision, every market fluctuation, every moment of compassion or indifference. James spends his mornings at a day labor center, lining up before dawn with dozens of others hopping for temporary construction or cleanup work, understanding that steady employment is his only path back to housing, yet recognizing the paradox that even full-time wages often lag behind rising rents. And as he listens to conversations around him, he hears similar stories. Workers displaced after landlords sold properties to investors. Seniors forced out when fixed incomes could not match property tax increases. Young adults priced out of neighborhoods where they grew up. and he begins to see that his situation is part of a broader pattern in which affordable housing stock shrinks while demand intensifies. Tanya, meanwhile, navigates the exhausting logistics of survival with children, coordinating school drop-offs from whichever couch or motel room they occupy that week, explaining gently why they cannot invite friends over, reassuring them that this instability is temporary even when uncertainty clouds her own confidence. And when she meets with a housing counselor, she learns about credit checks, application fees, income thresholds, and competitive screening processes that favor applicants with spotless histories, creating invisible barriers for families who have already endured eviction or debt. And the counselor speaks of systemic shortages, too few units priced for low-income renters, too many households competing for each opening, while Tanya calculates how many extra shifts she can accept without sacrificing the time her children need. Marcus continues attending group therapy sessions, sitting in a circle with other veterans who share stories of service and struggle, discovering solidarity and shared experience, yet confronting the reality that mental health support alone cannot resolve homelessness without stable housing. And outreach workers advocate for a housing-first approach, arguing that permanent shelter provides the stability necessary to address employment, addiction, and trauma. But funding constraints and long waiting lists mean Marcus must remain patient, carrying his belongings from shelter to shelter as seasonal demand rises and beds become scarce. Angela volunteers occasionally at a community kitchen, finding purpose in serving meals to others who mirror her own circumstances, reflecting on the irony that neighborhoods once overlooked are now targeted for redevelopment, their increased desirability driving up land values and taxes, pushing out longtime residents whose roots run deepest. And she speaks during a local forum about the human cost of appreciation without protection, urging city leaders to expand tax relief programs and invest in deeply affordable housing rather than solely market-rate developments. Across Memphis, nonprofit organizations collaborate with faith groups and volunteers to conduct point-in-time counts, attempting to measure the scope of homelessness on a single winter night. Yet even they acknowledge that such counts capture only a fraction of the hidden reality. Families doubled up with relatives, individuals sleeping in cars, youth couchsurfing to avoid shelters, and data becomes both a tool and a limitation, essential for funding yet insufficient to convey lived experience. As weeks turn into months, James manages to save a small sum from intermittent jobs, only to discover that application fees and deposits consume savings quickly, illustrating how re-entry into housing requires not only income but upfront capital many do not possess. And he considers relocating farther from the city center, where rents are marginally lower, though transportation costs threaten to offset any savings, revealing the complex calculus of affordability, where proximity to work, schools, and services matters as much as rent itself. Tanya's voucher is finally accepted by a landlord willing to participate in the program, a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, and the day she receives the keys is marked not by extravagance, but by quiet relief, her children choosing corners for their beds, marveling at the simple privilege of a door that locks and a refrigerator they can stock. Yet even this milestone carries fragility because maintaining housing requires sustained income and stability in a market that remains volatile. Marcus receives notice of an opening in a supportive housing complex designed for veterans, offering not only a private unit but on-site counseling and job placement assistance. And though the wait has been long, the transition represents a turning point, underscoring how targeted programs can create pathways out of chronic homelessness when adequately funded and coordinated. Angela partners with local advocates to campaign for inclusionary zoning policies that would require new developments to allocate a percentage of units as affordable, attending meetings where developers express concern about profitability while residents emphasize community preservation. And the debate highlights the tension between economic growth and social equity, between attracting investment and safeguarding access. Throughout these intertwined journeys, the broader housing market continues its fluctuations, influenced by interest rates, construction costs, investor activity, and demographic shifts, reminding us that homelessness is inseparable from macroeconomic forces, yet profoundly personal in its consequences. And the narrative returns repeatedly to the streets where tents cluster beneath overpasses, where volunteers distribute supplies, where police occasionally conduct sweeps that displace encampments without resolving underlying needs, raising questions about public safety, public space, and public responsibility. In community forums, residents voice frustration about visible homelessness while advocates urge empathy and systemic solutions, and city officials attempt to balance budgets with expanding demands for shelter beds, rental assistance, and mental health services, illustrating how complex and multifaceted the challenge remains. As the seasons change, Memphis endures summer heat waves that intensify health risks for unsheltered individuals, followed by autumn storms that flood low-lying encampments, and winter nights that test the capacity of emergency shelters, each season exposing vulnerabilities and resilience alike. James eventually secures a steady warehouse position through a workforce program, rebuilding credit slowly, determined not merely to rent again, but to pursue ownership someday despite daunting price tags, symbolizing the enduring aspiration for stability. Tanya settles into routines that restore her children's sense of normalcy, advocating at school meetings for greater awareness of housing insecurity among students. Marcus mentors newly homeless veterans, sharing his journey as evidence that support systems, though strained, can yield results. Angela continues organizing, her voice steady and insistent that rising home values must not eclipse human value. And as the camera pulls back once more to capture the skyline, the river, the neighborhoods in varying stages of transformation, the script affirms that homelessness in Memphis, like across the United States, is neither inevitable nor unsolvable but contingent on collective will, policy innovation, economic inclusion, and sustained compassion. And it closes this chapter not with finality but with momentum, acknowledging that while some have found footholds toward stability, many remain in limbo, waiting for opportunities, resources, and recognition that housing is foundational to dignity, health, and possibility, and that the measure of a city's prosperity lies not only in appreciating property values, but in how steadfastly it ensures that every resident has a place to call home.